Good morning. Welcome to our first official day of visual journaling for stress relief and spiritual growth. And just a note about the additional sound effects. They're working on the gutters on my building, so we'll have a little soundtrack in the background, hopefully not too distracting. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you saw the intro last week, I shared some examples of some of my journals from past years and shared a few materials that are sort of my core materials. And today we're going to be using some of the real basic materials. And we're going to start with just whatever drawing, writing tools that you find you connect with. And again, I have a whole collection of pens that I'll play with and explore, but different pens respond differently to the paper. And so everyone's going to find the way it feels in your hand, right? The way when you're holding it, how it feels to hold the tool, but also how the tool touches and moves on the paper. And for some people, that is a really important aspect of their journal process and their mark making process. So if you have not yet had a chance to explore your tools, this week might be a good week to do that. You might consider doing it with one of your journal entries that you do. You might just do a little test of the tools and find out, how does this tool work on my paper? How do I enjoy holding this tool in my hand? So the journaling strategy that I wanted to focus on and share today comes from the artist and educator Carla Sondheim, and I will share a link to her website. She's got just fabulous tricks and tips and techniques, and one of hers uses the ideas of morning pages, sort of the idea of morning pages from Julia Cameron's The Artist Way, but it sort of puts it into a sort of structure of sorts. And I was taking a Zentangle class last week, and I hadn't thought about it really, but there's that whole idea of the blank page. We have this beautiful blank page, and that either if you're making marks as a visual artist or you're making marks as a word artist, so poetry, short stories, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, the writing process, sometimes that page is intimidating. And the Zentangle artist that was teaching the class, she had to start with a border. And her reasoning behind that is that, once you've made the border, there's something on the page. Whew. A whole lot of pressure is suddenly gone, and you don't have to worry about ruining it. So the box journaling process gives you a little structure. So for those who are like, journaling, marks, this is going to be a great way to start. And then next week I'll do more of the free journaling demonstration where you can step outside of the box. So the box is literally a box. And people who don't consider themselves artists frequently say, I can't draw a stick figure and I can't draw a straight line. Yeah, well, without practice, neither can I. I do not spend a lot of time practicing drawing straight lines, and therefore my lines, not straight. So from the art side of the visual journal, I'm not worried about it. If having a nice box is important to you, then by all means, please pull out your ruler and do it that way. But the sort of informality of just creating this little border around the page really sort of gives you a start. So in the box journal, there are 4 parts to it, or 4 sections. And I find that as I've been doing them, I turn my book in different directions. So sometimes my book is oriented vertically, sometimes it's horizontal. I frequently pick up my book and just start working, and I don't pay attention to what direction it is, and so pages will be upside down in my books. So that formality is not important to me. So you have to decide, what is this book to you, right? So the 4 parts. The 4 parts are a list, a section of writing, so just sort of free writing, allowing your brain to just go through an idea or multiple ideas, a doodle, sketch, drawing, and the 4th one is sort of like an open, like maybe you're going to continue the writing into that space, maybe you're going to do a second drawing, maybe you want to do 2 lists. So I almost always start with the date. Sometimes it's in the border, sometimes it's within the page. So if you want to start and make that part of your boxes, it could be a drawing. So I might start, and I just realized to check, just make sure. Okay. Yeah, we're all in the screen. So I'm going to start by just making this little box here. And today, numbers are not my forte. It is Tuesday, June 23. So I could play with this a little bit. So I'm just going to do a little banner at the top. You could do a badge of sorts, like an award. So, and then putting in the date. And it's up to you. I was not previously putting in the day of the week. However, sometimes that's interesting later when you're going back, so you might want to include that. It is June 23, 2020. And I have this little space left here, and it is mostly sunny right now with a little bit of clouds. So I'm just going to put a little sunshine. And I might go back and add color to that later. I don't know. I have a little extra space. I could go back and put something in later on. So you can play with that. It can be like that, or it can be really simple. And so here I was taking notes, really simple, 27 February 2020. And then I also put the location. Oh, so maybe I'll put that on there. So I can put the location, art table. We are at the living room art table. So there we go. Lists. Your list could be long, it could be short. I'm not going to tell you how many things need to be in a list. You need to decide. Your list could, and so that said, you get to decide the shape of the box. So as I've been doing these, I have played with all different sort of compositions. So I might make a nice long section here. So if this is my drawing, this is my list. That's a really long list. Maybe I'll cut it in half, and now I've got a list and my other. And then this would be my writing area. So some people like to number their lists. I like bullet points a lot. Gives me flexibility. This list could be a list of things that I need to do today. So they could be really, really relevant, and they could be set for a time frame, right? So I need to today vacuum, I need to wash the peaches, I need to buy jam jars. So these are the things I'm going to do today. It could be a list of things that I want to do this week. Sometime this week, I will make sure that I clean up all the art supplies on the floor. Clean art supplies on the floor. Sometime this week, I will read 2 chapters in a book. Sometime this week, I will finish the first module in my edX course. So there's a week and there's a timeline. Your list could be a list of things that are important to you. I have lists of favorite flowers. I made a list of all the words that I could come up with that were synonyms for pink. You might make a list of things that make you happy. That list is there for you. It could be something that you do first. It could be something that you do last. Maybe if it's the first thing that you're going to do, it informs what you end up writing about. So on my list, I have that edX class that I haven't started, but I need to start. And so why haven't I started that? Well, now I'm going to start writing, and I might write about why am I avoiding starting that class. It's a free class. It doesn't cost me anything. It's in a subject matter that I'm interested in. What's holding me back from starting it? So that could be what informs this side. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. And then maybe I have a list of things that are, there, and maybe I have a second list of different things today. I don't know. It's sort of, you get to play with it. I used a box journal to explore my tools and materials. So this, let me make sure that we're in the screen. This page here, so I set it up, and it was going to have the writing. I have my list here, and then I have, these ended up being different pens. So I have my handy dandy yogurt container of favorite pens. I really need to test out the Bob Ross pen on the paper. I haven't done that. But I pulled out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pens out of here. And then I made marks. I labeled it with what it was, and I made the marks on the page. Gave me a chance to hold the tool, to feel how it interacts with the paper, how it feels in my hand to do a whole block. And then I chose one, and for this one, this is more of that freestyle writing, right? So my hairography here, which was an assignment for a course, my writing, my journaling, rather than being across the page here, is in the shape of the hair. So that ended up being the writing. It ends up being a little bit of drawing, and I have a list. This technically could be, I guess, a list itself. But this is one way you could play with testing out your writing tools. So that's something to consider. This is a little bit more of what most of mine look like. A list. Here I have ideas of phrases or quotes, and then I did this contour line drawing. That is my mug. Can't identify it, but I like the way the lines thick and thin. So it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be deep. It's getting some ideas out, playing with some ideas, right? as you are planning your book, you also want to be thinking about personal versus public, right? I generally, when I start my books, because I've used a lot of them for courses that I was taking where we had to turn them in because we were doing assignments in these, I'm writing things that if someone else reads them, that's okay with me. This for me is not a therapy journal. So if I were to bring it to school, and my students were to see it, I wouldn't have to worry about them seeing, oh, Miss Schickle's having a nervous breakdown. No, I wouldn't share these with elementary students, but if I was working with high school students, maybe middle school students, I might share selected pages with them. But is this something that if you have it sitting on the table in your living room and you have a guest who comes, would you be okay with that guest paging through it? Or is this a book that you're going to put away because it is more of a diary for you? So that's just something to be thinking about. What is your purpose for this book, right? Again, something I mentioned in the intro, but come back to today. This is a place for mistakes. It's a place for imperfections. It's a place for practicing. It's a place where ideas could become something more later. But for me personally, this is not a place where I am trying to make a perfect thing. So know that it's, think about what is this, your book that you have in front of you right now? What is it for you, right? Because that is how this book is going to be and how you're going to use it, and how you feel about it is going to impact what you do with it, right? So if it's going to be something that's really personal, but it informs your writing or your art making or your sermon writing, or your feeling like your words empower you to write a letter to the editor in the newspaper, right? It could all start there, and maybe think of it as a rough draft, but as you go, it's going to change and it's going to develop. And I think they show growth. They show, but I don't think of it as, I'm not looking at it as this, potentially this is going to be a published book someday. If that would happen, that could be kind of cool, but that's not my goal for this, right? My books are places where I'm playing with ideas. I'm playing with that idea of, I haven't started that class. Why haven't I started that class? I'm playing with the idea of, what is it about my garden on my balcony that inspires me and inspires my work? So those are things to play with in your journal. And I'll be creating a list of prompts, and I'm thinking about, it'll be in a Google Doc that I will make a link to in the comment section underneath the video later. So that is playing with a box journal, giving yourself a framework to start. How you use the journaling part is up to you, right? Since this is not a graded thing, this is, what do you need to write and when do you need to write? Sometimes I write 3, 4, 5 days in a row. Sometimes I do every other day. I went a week last week without doing a single journal entry, and I didn't have things that I was in a place to write down yet. Maybe I did and I just didn't know it, but so it's okay if there's space in between entries. So in my books, along with, I like to have, these are nice thick pages. I like to have, sometimes there's a sequence, there'll be a Tuesday, really one page? Wednesday, Thursday, and then maybe this set of pages is where I'm going to explore with markers. So what I'm going to transition to right now is using some water-soluble markers, so basic markers. These are Crayola markers. I also have, so that you can see how they work, I have, these are just a Papermate Flare office pen. And then I don't have a full set of these, but these are Tombow watercolor markers. So all of these will react and bleed when they get wet. So just gonna play with that on the page, and it's creating it'll create a watercolor effect on the page. This is one of those cases where, man, I haven't used this book yet. I don't know how these pages are gonna respond. So I'm not gonna do, I've got my journal page. I don't wanna do it on the back of that because I don't know how the paper is gonna respond yet. So I'm gonna play on this page that doesn't have anything on the back of it yet. That's my strategy here. So with color and thinking about color, this could be a page where you want to play with markers and you want to explore every single color. That's fine. Or it could be a page where you are working with colors that are meaningful or symbolic to you. So traditionally, culturally, cultures assign meaning to colors. As an artist who wants to think about my own connections, I sometimes have struggle with that because frequently we have our own personal thoughts about it. So when I'm working with my students, I'm not going to tell you that blue is a sad color. I'm not going to tell you that red is an angry color, because you might feel very differently. You might not feel that blue is an angry color, that they're a sad color. You might think that blue is a joyful color. And so when you're playing with colors and playing with these on this page, I encourage you to think about personal meaning and what do these colors mean to you as you're putting them down. Similarly, you could think about types of marks. So if purple is a calm color for me, then I might make a mark that I feel is calm. Right? So for me, that is a series of calming lines. That gesture, that movement of my hand on the paper, okay? For someone else, that movement might make you feel kind of seasick and you might not be so about it. If you have not spent a lot of time with color, I'll just take a moment, and colors have generally sort of color families, right? So when you're putting colors down, it's not a requirement, but to think about how they're connected, right? We have our three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. We don't make those, nature makes those. We cannot mix any other colors together to get them. We use those to make these other colors. So if I want colors on my page, when I add water to this, that are not going to make brown, and maybe brown is a color that makes you feel a connection to the earth and you like browns, and that's a color that you want to create, then that's something you can do intentionally. But just so in case you put colors down and so you're not disappointed when they create browns, right? So purple and yellow, purple and orange are going to make a brown color together because they are complement, right? Your blue and orange are going to make a brown color. Your red and green are going to make a brown color. And pink, because it's red plus white, is going to make, with green, is going to make a brown color. So when you put your colors down on the page and you put a color next to each other, colors are going to talk to each other visually. So thinking about, is it okay if my colors push back against each other? So if I'm putting yellow next to that, and my purple, and I perceive purple as calm and yellow as a happy, relaxing, sort of energizing color, there's going to be a visual play, and there's also going to be that emotional play, right? They're going to push back against each other on the page. They're also, if I get the paper wet, or I should say when, because my objective here is to add water to this and play with it a little bit, I want to be thinking about that. So I might use colors that are more closely connected with the purple. And then this is another one of the Tombos. So the fun of these are they have this brush on the end. It's a nice bright color, pink, which makes me happy. So these are nice for filling in large spaces. They're nice for calligraphy. They also have this thin line. So I'm just going to put a couple of those lines on there because this is a page for exploring and experimenting with these colors, these marks. And then I'm also going to experiment with the water to create this space on the page. You might also consider, if this is an activity that you want to do for sort of a meditative process, what kind of music do you connect with that you could play in the background that might inform or inspire your marks? So your connections to sounds. If I'm looking for a sort of stress relieving type mark, a calming mark, a meditative mark, then I'm probably not going to do woodpecker type stippling marks. I'm going to go for these longer, smoother marks. But what is it that you want to focus on? What emotion might you want to consider while you're making these marks? Shapes. I'm going with, I tend to do a lot of circles. I tend to do a lot of spirals. And so those end up coming into my pages. And I really don't want to do the blue next to the orange. This is a nice way to play with finding out how your colors look as well. Because you're going to find, I'm like, oh, pink. Well, pink, yeah, they're both pink, two different kinds of pink. What kind of pink might I want to use in a different drawing? Do I want to use the brighter pink? Do I want to use the more muted pink? So at this stage, I'm going to grab a brush and I'm going to use a flat, might play with this one too, but this is the brush I'm going to start with. So here is where I'm going to check my page. Okay, this is a pretty solid paper. It's the paint is not, or the marker is not going through, but here is where when I add water to this, that can change, right? We're going to soak the paper with water. The water is going to go through. If I don't want that to get on this other page here, I've got this extra piece of paper. I'm going to just stick this scrap paper underneath so that if it bleeds through, it's not going to go all the way through. That's just a random paper I had in here. You can use a mailer, you know, the grocery mailers that come are nice because they're sort of glossy and they won't, they'll protect your paper, sort of semi-waterproof. So how much water you use and the type of marker and the type of lines is going to influence how the marker ink pigment responds to the water. So if I'm using, and I really fancy here, ball jar that got appropriated for painting. So I can drop water on, and I'm just enough water that it, and let it sit for a moment and see what happens. I can, and when you lift the page, it does fun things. Just know that when you get to the seam at the center, it can flow through into pages way down in your book later. And if you're like me, where it's like, oh well, then great. If that is a problem for you, grab a paper towel and lay it at the edge of your page here, so that when it gets down there, it's going to go into the paper towel and stop, whereas this one I didn't have anything, so it just kept going. So here, the drops left this, the pigment was all lifted and dripped, right? And I'm just gonna, because I will stick my hand in that. And that's not necessarily bad, it's just not what I want to do. I'm gonna come back with my brush now, and I'm gonna start to draw or brush the paint out. I used a lot of water. I did not wipe my brush off. I just dipped it in, filled it up, and put it on. So now my water is moving around a lot. There's a lot of water on the page. It's going to bleed, so it's going to move around. I can move that. Again, if I wanted to, I could lift the page. Over here on the edge, the orange is just starting to halo and push into the purple there. If I want a little more control, I can use a different shaped brush. So it's a bit smaller, so I can control it a little bit differently. So this is an opportunity to play with the brushes. I like those little dots, so I'm not going to go all the way into that. And how will these little lines? I can also use this to experiment what happens if I come back into the wet and draw back into it with lines that are connected with and if you're using this as like a meditative activity, so maybe you're starting with a quote or a Bible verse that you want to think about. Maybe you're contemplating some kind of concept that is you're struggling with. So as you're working, maybe you're thinking about those words, and maybe your marks, instead of being attached to emotions or feelings, that feeling of calm, relaxing. I want that calm energy in here, right? So maybe instead of thinking about calm, maybe I am thinking about the essence of a quote. And so my marks could be connected to that. And in which case, if I'm thinking about a quote about power, or I'm thinking that I'm feeling stressed and I'm, my marks might be stressful marks. My marks might be marks that have more energy than this. So what do you want to try to play with in this page, right? And then I'm just gonna, continue, since I'm playing with that sort of calming type thing. I feel like I really need that these days. Now I can use this like a little bit like watercolor, right? So I've got paint essentially, right, on the brush from where I touched, and now I can go back in. It's much lighter. I've lost all those little lines. I don't know if that's important to me. I'm thinking about the lines that I still see in here, contrasted with these bleed marks, this more smooth. Is that important? I'm also thinking about, this is like very sun-like in these rays. So I'm going to extend these marks. And here's where, remember I talked about that, getting that brown. So I just pulled the orange through the blue. So that is going to go brown. But if I want to get more orange up there without that, then I can come back this way. Right. Now, this page could just be a page where I've explored feeling, emotion, color, and these lines. It could also, once it dries, this could be a page that I use for a free journaling later. So I would just encourage you to spend some time with whatever tools. Oh, I didn't use, let's see, where's the purple? I didn't do the felt tip, the flare pen. If I put it on top of that purple, I wonder what will happen there. Is it going to be seeable? So this is still a little damp there. Right, so how does each of these react to